And let's continue with the next talk. The title of the talk, Bare Objects in Uzbek and their anaphoric accessibility. And the authors are Seidel and Zarina Levy-Forsythe. So please, you're welcome.
Okay, can it be seen now?
Yeah.
Great. Okay, so thank you for the introduction. Our talk is going to be on bare objects in Uzbek and their anaphoric accessibility. So our main claim is going to be that bare direct objects in Uzbek are anaphorically accessible, and we analyze such objects as pseudo-incorporated. So among our main goals, the first would be to address this growing empirical disagreement in the literature regarding this property. The second would be to formulate an analysis of the data we obtained from the empirical study and to refine our analysis of pseudo-incorporation in Uzbek. And lastly, we would like to contribute to the research of Turkic noun incorporation. Now, in this talk, we focus on anaphoric potential of bare objects in standard Uzbek as it is spoken in the Republic of Uzbekistan. And we'll try to place this discussion in the context of this growing empirical disagreement in the cross-linguistic literature, including that discussing Turkic languages regarding one of the hallmarks of incorporation, or one of the defining properties, the anaphoric potential of incorporated bare objects. In our talk, we will present empirical evidence from the first grammaticality judgment study on this topic, specifically for Uzbek, and we'll show that the bare objects shown in one, marked in bold, are accessible for anaphoric uptake by covert anaphora. We will also compare our results to an earlier study from Turkish by Seidel, and place our discussion in this general study of Turkic noun incorporation. Now, the initial interest in the research of bare objects in Uzbek or in Turkic in general stems from this well-researched phenomenon of differential object marking established across Turkic languages. And DOM in Turkic is rather consistent. It follows primarily this referentiality scale shown in 2, although other factors have been mentioned as well. And for Uzbek, it renders the following contrast in object marking. So 3A, B, and C show objects that are higher on the specification on the referentiality scale. And we are particularly interested in the object shown in 3D. So it's completely bare, it's indefinite, and generally in the cross-linguistic literature, such objects are argued to be incorporated. Now, to gloss over the studies on noun incorporation, it would be important to mention that today we distinguish between 2 phenomena of noun incorporation. First would being the canonical, classical true incorporation, and second is pseudo incorporation. And the difference between the 2 is that true incorporation is, in the broadest sense possible, is identified, characterized by this very close morphosyntactic interaction between the bare minimal noun, usually stem or root. And in pseudo incorporation, this interaction is more distant, but we still see the persisting semantic properties of incorporation. Now, in the table 1, we show morphosyntactic and semantic properties of pseudo and also just general non-incorporation as applied to Uzbek. And in this talk, we'll be particularly interested in the last property, atypical discourse anaphora. And yeah, we'll discuss it further. Now, within the Turkic research on Turkic incorporation, both true and pseudo incorporation have been proposed. And we will follow the previous analysis for Uzbek and assume that Uzbek bare objects are pseudo incorporated. Yes, Elyesa?
So now turning to the main part of the talk, namely noun incorporation and discourse anaphora. So given the cross-linguistically attested morphosyntactic and semantic deficiency of pseudo-incorporated nouns, their anaphoric inaccessibility seemed to be an expected property ascribed to the inability to introduce a discourse referent. However, there has been an increased recognition that bare objects in incorporating languages present a more complex picture of an anaphoric uptake. So, for instance, Farkas and de Zwart investigated the anaphoric potential of pseudo-incorporated nouns in Hungarian, and they argue that these nouns are number neutral and discourse translucent rather than discourse transparent, since they can only be picked up by covert pronouns, shown in 4, which is also marked in bold. So based on Farkas and de Zwart, Modarressi claims that pseudo-incorporated nouns in Persian show properties of discourse transparency, since here in Persian, they are accessible through overt and covert singular and plural pronouns, which is shown in 5. The bare noun and the pronoun are also marked in bold here. And she argues that the pseudo-incorporated nouns, introduce number-neutral discourse reference, but depending on word knowledge, one or more entities are evoked. Okay. So basically, Dayal gives a little bit a different theory on this. So in contrast to Farkas and de Zwart and Modarressi, she claims that the number neutrality of the pseudo-incorporated noun in Hindi here depends on the spectral properties of the event. She argues that the pseudo-incorporated nouns are not inherently number neutral, but rather they are semantically singular. And this number neutrality comes only in atelic environments, as seen in 7. Sorry. So in 7, we have an atelic environment. Anu girl saw for her son for 2 years. She always asked her is here not possible, but the girl the same question. And according to Dayal, this number neutrality reading can only be evoked in atelic conditions, because here word knowledge clashes with the sentence here, because the girl cannot be always the same girl in the same event. So there's many sub-events in which in every single event there is a different girl which has been seen and then asked a question.
Also glossing through the research on Turkic incorporation, as I mentioned, there is an empirical disagreement, and for the same language, different empirical claims are made regarding the anaphoric potential of bare objects. So, for example, for Turkish, which is the best studied language within the group, the example 8 shows that overt anaphora has been both shown to be ungrammatical and grammatical. So in 8a, we see a grammaticality of such uptake, and in 8b, not only it is grammatical, but it is also accessible to singular and plural pronouns. And for Tatar, we know that it's been reported that bare objects are anaphorically accessible to overt anaphora. Now, for Turkish, there exists also an empirical disagreement on whether bare objects are accessible to covert anaphora. And so 10A and B show that such accessibility is impossible and is lacking. And in 10C, we see the opposite claim. For Uzbek, again, divergent views exist, and Turker has argued that covert anaphora, she exemplifies covert, but actually claims that any type of anaphora is impossible in reference to bare objects. But it's been also claimed that bare objects like rasm here in 12 are able to be picked up in the subsequent sentence by overt pronominals, covert anaphora, possessive pronominal anaphora, but here, crucially, unlike non-incorporated objects, such uptake is both singular and plural uptake is possible. Yeah, so Elyesa.
So previous research suggests that lexical semantics of the verbs play a crucial role in the phenomenon of object incorporation. For instance, Chang and Ladusav show for Kamoro that incorporation is limited to verbs of possession, which obligatorily incorporate their objects. Also, Van Gelenhoven argues that there are 2 types of verbs in Westgrendenblendig. The one is intentional verbs, which are inherently incorporating, and then extensional verbs, which alternate between incorporating and non-incorporating instances. Likewise, Dayal demonstrates that there are different lexical entries for incorporating and non-incorporating verbs in Hindi. And also Liotikova and Perelsvik claim that only light verbs in Tatar may be analyzed as involving pseudo-incorporation, but not regular verbs. So however, the interaction between lexical semantics of the incorporating verb and the anaphoric accessibility of the incorporated object received little attention. So there's only the study by Dayal, who covers this point in her work on Hindi pseudo-incorporation, arguing that the anaphoric accessibility depends on lexical semantics, namely aspectual properties, as I mentioned before. Another topic which hasn't been considered in the literature at all on object incorporation is the influence of grammatical role parallelism on anaphora resolution, namely the idea that hearers tend to prefer to connect the subject anaphor to a subject antecedent and an object anaphor to an object antecedent. So there's one study by Seidel, who was the first to empirically examine the anaphoric accessibility of pseudo-incorporate nouns in Turkish, and considered the effect of the two factors I just mentioned, namely grammatical row parallelism and lexical semantics of the incorporating verbs in two different studies. The first study investigated overt pronouns in object position as shown in 13 and showed that pseudo-incorporated nouns prefer a singular uptake, namely in A and B, respectively, and irrespective of anaphoric type of expression. And the second study investigated covert pronouns as shown in 14C in subject position and showed that firstly, bare objects support anaphoric uptake with covert pronouns, and second, continuations with adnominal demonstratives are preferred over continuations with covert pronouns. And what this study also examined are different event types, namely A and B, usage events and creation events. And with regard to this, Seidel showed also that bare nouns or pseudo-incorporate objects are more accessible in creation events. So now turning to our study, our grammatically judgment study, I will first present the hypotheses from the literature and the predictions we had for our study. So the hypotheses are the following. First, pseudo-incorporated objects are less accessible than their non-incorporated counterparts, which many studies have shown. Second, covert pronouns refer to highly accessible reference, whereas adnominal demonstratives refer to less accessible reference. This has been discussed in lots of literature about accessibility theories. And the third hypothesis is pseudo-incorporated objects in creation events are more accessible than pseudo-incorporated objects in usage events. The predictions for our study are the following. First, covert pronouns referring to pseudo-incorporated objects in Uzbek are less acceptable than adnominal demonstratives referring to pseudo-incorporated objects. And second, covert pronouns referring to bare objects in creation events are more acceptable than bare objects in usage events. So the method and design, we replicated this earlier study from Turkish, and the design consisted of 4 conditions. In a 2x2 factorial design, we manipulated anaphoric expression type and the verb type. So in total, we had 4 conditions. And here you can see in 16, the 2 context sentences. The first context sentence always using some usage verbs, and the second context always creation verbs. And then we had continuations in 17 and 18, A and B, a continuation with a covert pronoun, and then a continuation with an adnominal demonstrative. All items were distributed onto 4 lists, each of which was balanced with respect to the verb type and the type of anaphoric expression. In total, we had 92 participants, which they received a web-based questionnaire and were asked to rate the sentence on a scale from 1 very bad to 7 very good, with regard to the naturalness of the link of the context sentence and the target sentence. So here you can see in figure 1 the results. The data shows that anaphoric uptake of bare objects in Uzbek is acceptable, and statistical analysis reveals that contexts with overt anaphoric expressions are rated significantly better than contexts with covert anaphora. Also, there's this comparison with regard to Turkish, from the reported study here. So the difference, the main difference here you can see is that in Turkish, the event type matters, that there is a difference between event types, but for Uzbek, we didn't find such an effect. So here usage events and creation events are rated, yeah, very similarly. So there is no significant difference found here.
So our findings seem to go hand in hand with the findings in Turkish, and we do find one micro variation, just like Elyesa mentioned. In Uzbek, the anaphoric uptake of bare objects doesn't seem to be, it seems to be stable across event types. Now these findings altogether seem to support the view that unlike non-incorporated direct objects, pseudo-incorporated objects do not introduce a discourse reference immediately, but rather an extra step would be needed through complex event formation. And how do we formalize it? We propose to follow Krivka and Moderesi's account for pseudo-incorporation in Persian. This account is formulated in DRT, and as 18 shows, so we have bare noun maktub, it's covert anaphoric can refer to it, and essentially the claim would be that bare objects are event-dependent definites, but their definite interpretation would never come out because they remain within the DP, and their interpretation is tied to the Davidsonian event argument. Yeah, so the anaphoric uptake, yeah, so because the discourse referent is located in the subordinate structure, it's not so easy to extract it. And so anaphoric uptake would require another step, which is abstraction and summation rule. I can discuss it later, but essentially throughout this process, we first abstract the DR out of the necessary DRS conditions, and then the summation would give us the possibility of this number neutral discourse referent to be picked up by an anaphor. So it's an extra step. It explains why, at least it proposes some kind of understanding of how why bare objects are accessible to anaphoric uptake, but this uptake is not as good as it is in non-incorporated objects, and that bare objects are characterized by number neutrality. So we see the number neutrality effect, and that account does explain it.
So turning to the conclusion and future research, we conclude from our results that bare objects in Uzbek are accessible, as we have shown, and we couldn't confirm that their anaphoric potential is dependent on the event types, suggesting that future research may take into account other event types in comparison, maybe such destruction verbs, for example, book ripping. And the present investigation also didn't take into account the comparison between covert and overt pronouns. So therefore, we would suggest conducting a forced choice task, including both conditions in one experiment. And future studies should also investigate anaphoric reference to different types of full-fledged direct objects by taking different types of anaphora, covert or overt pronouns, into account.
Yep. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And we have no less than 10 minutes for questions. So the first question, I suppose, is by Natalia Serdobolskaya. Natasha, welcome.
Thank you for a very interesting talk. And so I have two, one is clarification question. Can you return to the previous slide? Oh, sorry, you stopped sharing.
Sorry.
Guys, sorry.
Yeah, the one where you had the one before last, I think.
So the items.
This one. Thank you. So do you understand it correctly that in that case, it could be translated either as it was 3 pages or all of these letters were 3 pages?
Yes. So we do have a multiple reading event interpretation, and therefore that would explain this number neutrality effect, or rather the ability to refer back by plural anaphora.
Yeah, I see. Thanks. And another question is kind of adding another parameter maybe to your classification?
Sure.
Or maybe you already thought about that when you talked about different types of covert and overt anaphora. I mean, the cases when you have a pronominal, not demonstrative, not the one actually used for anaphoric reference, but the one a quantificational pronoun, something like all of them were 3 pages, or some of them were 3 pages. As well, I worked on Marie, which is quite, which
Yes, I'm familiar.
yeah, shows similar features to Uzbek and to many Turkic languages in respect of DOM, and it seems that they're differently used than normal anaphoric pronouns, and in that case they are possible, but the simple, well, real anaphoric pronouns are not possible. And I wonder whether it's significant here, and if it plays any role in.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yes, we'll definitely think about it.
Good idea, thank you.
Yes.
Thanks.
Okay, more questions? I have maybe a kind of question, maybe not very much concerned with your main topic, but however, what do you find, maybe you mentioned it, sorry, do you find any difference between the cases with bare nouns when you do have one noun unmarked for direct object, and there are some other cases, at least in some other Turkic languages, when you can have direct, unmarked direct objects with some adjectives or some dependent stuff a part of it. Are there any differences between exact bare nouns, just bare stem with nothing, and maybe some other cases which are allowed in Uzbek?
Thank you for the question. So we do find completely bare nouns in light verb constructions. So whenever we have a light verb construction, something like with verbs to give, make, we do have a completely bare noun, unlike the bare we call the bare object. So these bare nouns frequently they are completely discourse opaque, for example, but the bare objects we're discussing, they have more material. So we claim that they're NPs and they can be modified by adjectives. So sometimes these light verb constructions can combine with the bare objects. So then you have this construction that I think you asked about. So so yeah, previously we've argued that maybe bare nouns and light verb constructions are actually truly incorporated because they have a very tight morphosyntactic interaction with the verb compared to bare objects.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
May I ask another question if there's?
Sure.
Thank you, yeah.
Well, I was also thinking about split number encoding, because in many languages it is connected to animacy, but not to definiteness or other referential features. So how does it interact with number neutrality at these constructions? And actually, is it governed by the same factors in general in Uzbek?
So we don't see animacy effect does play a role in differential object marking just throughout, but we actually find that in Uzbek, note worthiness or name worthiness overrides animacy. So we do see animate objects being incorporated, like human kill, give birth to a child, child give birth, etc. And the number neutrality stays just across all these combinations. So yeah, I think we should consider this.
But in general, what we see in Turkish is that there's always a singular interpretation. So
with animate.
yeah, also for the inanimate ones. So this continuation always prefers a singular. So
but then it may depend on some kind of context.
They are number neutral.
Unlike Uzbek, right?
Yes. But in Uzbek, it depends on the context, etc. So it's really, we see a lot of pragmatic things happening. So.
But Uzbek does have number neutrality. I mean.
Oh yes.
Yeah, in subject position and all of that other positions.
Oh yes.
And does it show the same semantic restrictions as in direct object position, or is it not studied yet?
No, as far as I know, so we know that, for example, in the subject's position, the number neutrality is gone. But whenever we have a pre-verbal subject, there are claims that such subjects are incorporated. So yeah, this would be something interesting to follow, but I've never looked into it myself. But yeah, there is something special about this pre-verbal, immediately pre-verbal position.
Yeah, I see. Thanks.
Okay. Does anybody have any question? If not, let's thank our authors, and thank you so much.